Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today is going to be the first of a few reviews this year that are going to be kind of nostalgia reviews. And that is because I of course said in my goals for 2021 video that I have the goal to review every single adult high fantasy written by a woman that I'm reading within 2021, but also that I have already read and that are on my shelves. Because of that, I have started a rereading project in 2021, rereading most all of the adult high fantasy written by women that I read long ago. For those of you who don't know, my start into adult high fantasy was in fact by reading works written by female authors. And so yeah, I am also rereading all of those books and reviewing all of those books, and this is the first of those reviews, and that is The Black Magician's Trilogy by Trudy Canavan. This trilogy would now probably actually be pushed into the YA section. However, after rereading this and even before that, I think that is not the case. I certainly think that this is a series that is kind of along the border of YA and adult, and that can be read by YA readers, but that mostly is an adult series. I also think this is a great series to get started into adult high fantasy, in fact. And the reason why I think this is more an adult series rather than a YA series is because even though, first of all, our main character is 16 at the start of the series and 20 at the end of the series, even though she is a teenager during the majority of this series, I think the themes that we deal with within this story are not really themes of growing up and finding your place in the world. I mean, kind of finding your place in the world, but not in a teenage way. And then also the second reason, and one of the main markers for me if a series is YA or not, is that most of the characters, aside from our main character, are in fact adult characters. And like definitely adult characters, not young adult, early 20s characters, but like 30s and older. So yeah, as I said, this is going to be the first of kind of nostalgia reviews. And so I have to say that while I try to, you know, review this series with new eyes, I just have to add a grain of salt for you and saying that this is one of the first series that I ever read, adult high fantasy series that I ever read. I first read this when I was 11 or 12 years old. I have since reread it multiple times, even though the last time I think has been like 10 years ago now already almost, that I fully read all 3 books, is what I mean. And so there is a lot of nostalgia involved with me reviewing this series. So, you know, I have my pink glasses on a little bit. I'm gonna try to still, you know, find things to critique. I found new things to critique that I completely ignored when I first read it and so on, but just be aware of that is what I'm saying. So yeah, this trilogy was published in the early 2000s, which I usually don't add publication date to my reviews, but there's a very specific reason why I'm saying this, which we'll get more obvious later on. But yeah, this was published in the early 2000s, which by the way is also the reason why it kind of manages to stay on the cusp between YA and adult series. I think if it was published today, the publisher would have pushed the author to more firmly put it within the YA section of the high fantasy genre. But since the early 2000s didn't have YA as we now know it, we are lucky enough that we get the series as it is today in all its complexity, because I think it would have lost a lot of the personal growth complexities if it was just a proper YA series. But anyway, it was published from 2001 to 2003. It's a trilogy, as I have said. It consists of 3 books. The first book is The Magician's Guild, the second book is The Novice, and the third book is The High Lord. I will not tell you what this series is about, aside from the fact that we follow our main character Sonea, who discovers magical powers one day. She is from kind of the slums of her city. In her city there's this magician's guild which usually doesn't take in anyone else but nobility, really. However, when her magical powers are discovered, she is taken into the Magician's Guild and her journey starts from there. Now I'm gonna stop holding up all 3 of the books and just hold up this one. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, by the way, so you don't have to be scared of spoilers. And as always, I'm gonna start with negative stuff, which there are some negative things that I have about this. Some that I personally find negative, some that are just kind of warnings. The first negative thing is that the politics and the world building of this world aren't too in-depth, gotta be honest. We focus a lot more on the magicians, on the characters, on their character development, and also within the guild, on the politics within the guild. However, there are also some elements, both within the whole country politics, but also within the politics of multiple countries that come into play that could have been, you know, looked at a bit more thoroughly and that aren't really there. And I think that's kind of sad. I think that's a shame. I think there was an opportunity missed there. However, I still think that the series is great regardless. I don't know if the reason for that is nostalgia, but I think it's still great regardless, and I think it has some of the best character work ever, but we'll get to that later. Then the second negative thing, which also kind of connects to, you know, the other countries in the world, is that you have this kind of one evil country that's very much based on Orientalist views of the Middle East, like 19th century Orientalist views of the Middle East, which I would just say is a criticism in high fantasy, especially in early 2000s high fantasy in general. So yeah, also be aware of that, although we don't get to see too much of like how Orientalist based this country actually is until like the prequel, which is somewhere up there. And then also the following series after this one, which I never finished, also has a lot more of the culture of that other country, which we don't get to see too much of that one in this series, but just be aware of that regardless. And the third and last negative thing that I want to say, which I personally don't care about, but I know there's a lot of people who do care about that stuff, is that the main romance in the third book at least is a major age gap romance. There's 13 years between the characters, so you know, also be aware of that, because I know some people don't like that. I don't mind it. I think it's great. I think actually the romance is what Dark Lena stands want the Darkling and the Lena to be. However, it's non-problematic, in my opinion at least, as well done. So yeah, as I said, be aware of that, although the romance only plays a very small part within the story and like isn't a major part whatsoever, and only really starts to play a role in the third book, to be honest. So yeah. And now let's get on to the plethora of positive and amazing things about this story. First, let's start with the less positive things, or like not less positive things, but like let's end on the big thing. That's what I wanted to say. First, I really do enjoy the plot in these books. I thought the books each had their own specific vibe while still being interconnected. In the first story, you kind of deal with Sonea discovering her powers. The second story very much is a school setting, which again also might lead to the series having more of a YA vibe, although I think the school setting isn't done in a way it's usually done within YA books. It's not even a school setting actually, it's more like college, university setting. But yeah, I think it's done incredibly well, and it's not, you know, just petty things within a school setting, but there's actual existential things discussed within this book. And then the last book pretty much is like the fight against the big bad type of storyline. But yeah, I think the plot is great, engaging, connected. I think there's enough action to kind of keep you going in a fast-paced way. It's actually quite fast-paced for an adult high fantasy series, gotta be honest. but then in between you also have enough low points in the story where you really have time to get to know the characters and where you have time for character development. And that brings me to the big amazing thing about this story, which is the characters. I absolutely love all of the characters. They are so easy to love in general. They are very complex characters. They are good characters, like truly from their heart good characters, but they are also characters that are incredibly flawed, which I actually think is what I love most about these characters. For example, just as an example, let's take the main mentor character, Rothan. Rothan is just a truly good character. He's like a lawful good type character, but he's also incredibly flawed. First of all, in the way that he thinks because he is good, that other people are going to be good as well. So he does not believe a lot of his friends even when they say, no, that character is awful and horrible, and just puts it down to just like, you know, petty arguments, because he just cannot believe other characters to be truly evil. And then on the other hand also you have this class conflict because, you know, on the one hand you have the guild who, as I said, only has nobility among their ranks, and on the other hand you have Sonia, who comes from the slums. And you know, you have this conflict between Rothan and Sonia, where Rothan just looks at the slums and is like, yeah, the poor people there, and he truly feels sorry for them. Like, it's not posturing for him, he truly feels sorry for them. But he also does not believe that there's any way you can make the situation better for them, which, you know, he's a magician, he has a lot of money, there's a lot of ways you can make things better for the people in the slums, but it's just like, you know, it's the order of things. There are poor people and there are nobility, and that's how it is. And he is still willing to change his opinion though. And that's what I mean with the characters being truly great, because there is no doubt that Rothan is a truly good character. However, as I said, he also is incredibly flawed. And him being good doesn't mean that he always has to have the right opinion or that he always has to make the right decision. But it just has to mean that, you know, he's willing to change and he's willing to learn, which just all the characters have, like not the ability to change and to learn, but just like, you know, being good. I mean, I do have to say honestly that, you know, the good characters have a lot more complexity and are a lot more interesting than the bad characters. The bad characters are just the type of characters that you love to hate because they are just so horrible. They're like Joffrey from Game of Thrones type characters. Like, you have this bully character who is just the absolute, oh, I hate him so much. I hate him so much. It's horrible. And then also Sonia as a main character is so interesting because she goes through so much character development, and I forgot how much strength she gains throughout the series. Like, in the first book she is very unsure, but it's not the type of unsure that you have a lot of times in like YA main characters, where it's like, oh my god, I'm so ugly, oh my god, no one likes me, oh my god, whatever. But it's kind of hard to explain the type of unsurety she has. But she learns a lot and she gains so much confidence throughout the story, throughout learning that there's people there who will be there for her, through having people who understand her, through having people who will tell her, you can do this, and who, you know, don't help her by taking away her ability to do things herself, but who just show her how she can help herself. And I just loved it about her so much in this series. Like, honestly, so many of the characters within the series are some of my all-time favorite characters. Rothan is one of my all-time favorite mentor characters. Sonia is such a strong main character and such an interesting main character. I forgot how interesting she is, and just like rediscovering her throughout reading this series or rereading this series, I was just like, I love this so much. There's also another character that I have gushed about a lot already on my channel, but I don't want to specifically gush about him in this series because I think it might be kind of spoilery gushing about him. But yeah, I just love all of them. And the last character I gotta talk about is Daniel. And Daniel is also the second reason why I pointed out when this series was published. Because Daniel was the first gay character, openly gay character that I read about in a series. In any series. Not just adult high fantasy, but in any series. And I just love Daniel so much because everyone who has read a lot of early fantasy, a lot of early modern fantasy will tell you how rare it is to come across a gay character. And how even rarer it is to come across a gay character who is a great representation of someone who, you know, loves people of the same gender. And that is what Daniel is. Daniel very much has to go through so much work, like, within himself. He has to work through his denial. He is from a country within this world where I think it might actually even be against the law to be gay, or at least, you know, to act upon it or whatever. And then in the second book, especially in the second book, I don't care if it's spoilers right now, but you know, sexuality of a character isn't a spoiler. But especially within the second book, there is so much done within his story and within his discovery that is just absolutely great. And he is a character who, even while he is in denial, he is never judgmental when he finds out another character is gay, which, again, internalized homophobia, but only towards himself, which, oh my god, I love Daniel so much. I cannot tell you how much I love Daniel. And you know, you can find a lot of reviews that are done now that don't take into account that this was written in 2001 to 2003, who will say, you know, it's just the representation to be woke or whatever, which is such a bullshit because, you know, woke did not exist in 2001. Back then, I don't think you could gain any brownie points by adding a gay character into an adult high fantasy novel. And before I finish this video and rant, I need to change the battery because it's blinking red. So my backup battery wasn't charged because I'm bad at booktubing. But where was I? Right. I think we were talking about how in the early 2000s woke didn't exist yet, so I really don't think that a gay character added to this series was added because of any woke points. In fact, I don't think that adding a gay character in the early 2000s to a high fantasy series, adult high fantasy series, would have been very beneficial in general, but yet Daniel still exists. Daniel is still amazing, and there's also a lot of criticism that, you know, Daniel never actually kisses his crush within the series, which, by the way, I think once again might be part of, you know, the same dynamics that made Robert Jordan not put actual canon lesbians within the Wheel of Time, but just pillow friends, which this is kind of the same time. It's around 2000s. Wheel of Time, again, I mean, started way earlier, but the last books were published in the 2000s. And so, yeah, also the second reason is that this series in general, with all the romances, be they heterosexual or homosexual, isn't very, you know, graphic. Is graphic the right word? You know, you hardly ever see any characters kiss, even in the main romance. So, you know, all valid criticisms, or would be valid criticisms, if this series were written today. I think, especially if we look like in YA fiction, I think there's better representation, more, you know, in your face representation of gay characters in books. But I think when we read books, we still have to consider, you know, when it was written. So I'm not gonna say read this series for the representation because, you know, there's more and better and main character representation nowadays. But still, if you want to read an early 2000s adult high fantasy series that, against all odds, also has a great, amazing gay character, then definitely go and read this series because, oh my god, I love Daniel so much. He's such a useless gay. Like, I have rarely read a book that wrote the useless gay trope so well. Like, it's so well done. I love it. But anyway, that was it for this review. Now I'm done with gushing about how amazing the characters are in this series. I am sure once I turn off the camera, I will remember something that I wanted to say in this video, but I can't remember it now. At least no non-spoilery stuff. Also, this was a buddy read with someone and we just had the most fun just talking about everything. It was either unintelligible, just screaming at each other about the characters, or we went like really in depth into socio-political stuff within this series. It was either or, no in between. But yeah, that was it for this video. If you enjoyed it, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. If you have read this series, tell me your thoughts on it in the comments down below. If you want to know anything more about this series, don't hesitate to ask me anything. I will try to answer your questions. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month, will also be linked down below. And with all of that said, I hope I will see you very soon. Bye!